Did you know your avocado toast could have medieval roots? Ever wondered what bread Jesus might have eaten? What if everything you thought about ancient grains was wrong? Number 7. The grain that time forgot, spelt. Just saying, it feels like whispering an ancient secret. This humble grain once dominated European fields from the Bronze Age through medieval times, feeding emperors and peasants alike. Yet somehow it vanished from our daily bread baskets, replaced by its more famous cousin, wheat. Imagine a grain so important that Roman soldiers marched on it, monasteries preserved it, and medieval taxes were paid with it. That's spelt for you, the superhero grain of yesteryear that's making a seriously epic comeback in today's health food stores. Before kale was cool, before quinoa was trendy, there was spelt. Known scientifically as Triticum spelta, this ancient grain has a nutty, slightly sweet flavor that medieval Europeans couldn't get enough of. It's like the original influencer of the grain world, having its heyday long before Instagram could document its popularity. Archaeological evidence suggests people were grinding spelt into flour as far back as 5000 BCE. That's right, while we were still figuring out this whole civilization thing, our ancestors were already baking with spelt. But here's the kicker, spelt isn't just some random grain. It's a genetic grandparent to modern wheat, with a robust hull that protected it from pests and pollution. This natural armor helped spelt thrive in harsh European climates where other grains failed miserably. Medieval farmers didn't have pesticides or climate-controlled storage, but they did have spelt's natural resilience. It was basically the Nokia 3310 of medieval agriculture, practically indestructible. Number 6. Holy grain, spelt in medieval religion and culture. Did monks have a secret superfood? What grain did Charlemagne specifically order to be grown throughout his empire? If you guessed spelt, you'd be historically correct. This grain wasn't just food, it was practically sacred. In the sprawling monasteries of medieval Europe, spelt was the grain of choice. Benedictine monks, following their rule of self-sufficiency, cultivated spelt fields that stretched across monastery lands. The famous Benedictine abbess Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th-century polymath who was centuries ahead of her time, wrote extensively about spelt's medicinal properties. She claimed it was the best of grains and recommended it for just about everything from creating happy minds to maintaining healthy bodies. Imagine the medieval equivalent of your wellness influencer, except she was running an abbey and advising emperors on the side. Hildegard wrote, "Spelt is the best grain. It creates a happy mind and puts joy in the human spirit. No matter how you eat it, either as bread or in other foods, it is good and easy to digest." Medieval health bloggers would have been all over this content. The grain became so culturally significant that it appeared in religious texts and paintings. Christ's body was symbolized by spelt bread in many European communities. Spelt was considered pure enough for sacred rituals and communion wafers. When medieval peasants bit into their daily spelt bread, they weren't just getting nutrition, they were participating in a food tradition with deep spiritual meaning. Even royal decrees couldn't stay away from spelt hype. Charlemagne, in his Capitulaire de Villais, a text detailing how royal estates should be managed, specifically ordered spelt to be grown. When an emperor makes sure your grain gets planted throughout his empire, you know you've made it big in the medieval agricultural world. Number 5. Spelt economics, the grain that built medieval markets. How much was a loaf of spelt bread worth in 1250? What grain could literally be used to pay your taxes? Would you believe an entire economic system partially built around a single grain? In medieval Europe, spelt wasn't just dinner, it was currency. Peasants often paid their feudal dues in spelt grain rather than coins. Imagine handing your landlord a sack of grain instead of writing a check for rent. That was completely normal in the spelt-centered economy of medieval Europe. Records from monasteries and manors show that spelt was collected, measured, and valued with incredible precision. The grain markets of medieval towns buzzed with spelt transactions. Merchants from Switzerland to England traded spelt futures, yes, they had those, speculating on harvest yields and weather patterns. A bad spelt harvest could send shockwaves through the medieval economy, causing bread prices to soar and potentially triggering social unrest. The phrase bread riots wasn't just a figure of speech. When spelt harvests failed, people literally took to the streets. Spelt's economic importance was so profound that specialized mills were constructed just to process it. Unlike modern wheat, spelt requires an extra processing step to remove its tough hull. This created an entire industry of specialized spelt millers who developed unique techniques and equipment. These medieval entrepreneurs invested significant capital in spelt processing technology, creating economic ripples throughout medieval communities. The grain even influenced medieval urban development. Towns often grew around spelt mills and spelt markets, with street names like Spelt Market or Miller's Lane still visible in European cities today. The architecture of storage facilities designed specifically for spelt with good ventilation to prevent moisture buildup became a common sight across the European landscape. Number 4, from field to feast, how spelt fed medieval Europe. What did a medieval farmer know that modern agriculturalists are just rediscovering? How did one grain adapt to everything from Alpine highlands to English lowlands? Ever tasted bread from a recipe older than your country? Medieval farming rotations almost always included spelt. Its remarkable adaptability meant it could grow in poor soils where other grains struggled. While wheat demanded rich, well-drained fields, spelt thrived in the varied landscapes of medieval Europe. From the mountainous regions of what is now Switzerland and Austria to the rolling fields of France and Germany, spelt adapted to local conditions with remarkable flexibility. The genius of medieval farmers showed in their spelt cultivation methods. They noticed that spelt's tough hull protected the grain from fungi, insects, and even the pollution from early medieval metalworking. This natural protection meant spelt could be stored longer than other grains, a crucial advantage in an era without refrigeration or modern preservation. A good spelt harvest could sustain a community through winter and beyond. In the medieval kitchen, spelt transformed into an astonishing variety of foods. The day typically began with spelt porridge, a filling breakfast that sustained peasants through long hours of field work. Lunch might feature flat spelt bread topped with seasonal vegetables. Dinner could include spelt soup thickened with vegetables and occasionally meat. Special occasions called for spelt beer, a popular beverage that provided both nutrition and safer hydration than medieval water sources. Medieval bakers developed specialized techniques for working with spelt flour, which has different properties than modern wheat flour. The slightly lower gluten content required longer kneading and specific fermentation practices. These techniques were passed down through generations of bakers, creating regional bread varieties still made in certain European bakeries today. The distinctive sourdough traditions of Switzerland and southern Germany evolved specifically around spelt's unique properties. Number 3, the social grain, how spelt created community. Did the bread you ate determine your social status? How could a single grain connect peasants and nobility? What happens when an entire community's survival depends on one crop? In medieval society, food wasn't just sustenance, it was a marker of social position. While everyone ate spelt, how you consumed it spoke volumes about your place in the social hierarchy. Peasants typically ate rough, dark spelt bread, while nobility enjoyed refined white spelt bread with the bran sifted out. The labor-intensive process of removing spelt's hull and then sifting the flour multiple times made white spelt bread a luxury only the wealthy could afford. Harvest time created a unique social bonding experience across class lines. When spelt fields turned golden in late summer, entire communities mobilized for harvest. Even nobility might symbolically cut the first sheaf, participating in rituals that dated back to pre-Christian times. Harvest festivals centered around spelt created rare moments of social mixing, with communal meals and celebrations that temporarily bridged rigid class divisions. Medieval women played crucial roles in spelt processing and preparation. While men typically handled field work, women managed the complex process of turning spelt grain into food. This included thrashing to remove the tough hulls, winnowing, milling, often using hand querns in the home, and finally baking. These laborious processes created female social networks as women often worked together, sharing techniques and stories while processing the grain. The communal ovens of medieval villages became social centers where people gathered not just to bake their spelt bread, but to exchange news and strengthen community bonds. Since maintaining individual ovens was expensive and impractical, most villages had shared baking facilities where families brought their prepared dough at designated times. These baking days became important social events where information flowed as freely as the aroma of fresh bread. Spelt literally shaped medieval bodies and health in ways modern science is just beginning to understand. The high nutrient content of medieval spelt varieties, combined with traditional processing methods that preserved these nutrients, provided a nutritional foundation different from our modern diet. Archaeological examination of medieval skeletons shows different dental and bone patterns compared to modern humans, partially attributed to their grain-centered diet. Number 2. The Great Grain Shift. Why spelt lost its crown. When did your food start changing without you noticing? How could centuries of agricultural tradition disappear within generations? What forces pushed aside the grain that once fed kings and peasants alike? The story of spelt's decline is a fascinating tale of agricultural economics, changing technology, and evolving tastes. Beginning in the late medieval period and accelerating through the Renaissance and Industrial Revolution, spelt gradually lost ground to bred wheat, Triticum aestivum. The reasons weren't about nutrition or flavor, they were about efficiency and economics. Bred wheat's easier processing became increasingly important as agriculture commercialized. Unlike spelt, wheat doesn't have a hull that requires additional processing steps. This seemingly minor botanical difference translated into huge efficiency advantages as farming scaled up. When every processing step required human or animal labor, spelt's extra demands became economically significant. Farm owners calculating profits found wheat's simpler processing increasingly attractive. The invention and spread of new milling technology also favored wheat over spelt. As water-powered and later steam-powered mills replaced hand milling, these new technologies were optimized for processing free thrashing wheat rather than hulled grains like spelt. The industrial standardization of milling equipment further disadvantaged spelt, creating a technological momentum that pushed farmers toward wheat cultivation. Changing consumer preferences played a role too. As white bread became increasingly associated with wealth and status, the market demand for wheat flour grew. Wheat's higher gluten content produced lighter, fluffier bread that became the preferred style, especially in growing urban areas where consumers were increasingly disconnected from traditional grain cultivation. Agricultural policies and economic incentives gradually shifted toward wheat production. As newly formed nation-states began implementing agricultural policies in the 18th and 19th centuries, wheat often received more institutional support. Its role in international trade exceeded spelt's, making it more attractive for market-oriented farmers. By the early 20th century, spelt had retreated to isolated pockets of traditional agriculture, largely forgotten by mainstream farming. Number 1. The Ancient Grain Renaissance, spelt's modern comeback. Could a medieval grain be the answer to modern health concerns? Why are bakeries and health food stores suddenly stocking something monks ate centuries ago? What does the return of spelt tell us about our relationship with food history? After centuries of decline, spelt has made a remarkable comeback in recent decades. Beginning in the 1970s and gaining significant momentum in the 1990s and 2000s, spelt has returned to fields, markets, and dinner tables. The story of its resurrection reveals much about changing attitudes toward food, health, and history. Interest in traditional and ancient grains surged as people began questioning industrial agriculture and processing. Spelt's long history and traditional role in European diets gave it authentic appeal in a food culture increasingly dominated by highly processed products. Its reintroduction began in organic and biodynamic agriculture movements, where farmers were already exploring alternatives to conventional farming methods. Scientific research began documenting spelt's nutritional profile, finding impressive levels of protein, fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Studies suggested that some people who struggle with modern wheat tolerance might be able to enjoy spelt products, though it does contain gluten and isn't suitable for those with celiac disease. This research provided evidence-based support for what Hildegard of Bingen had claimed centuries earlier about spelt's health benefits. Culinary experimenters found that spelt's nutty, complex flavor added dimension to breads, pastries, and grain dishes. Chefs and home bakers began incorporating spelt into everything from artisanal sourdough to pancakes and cookies. Its slightly different baking properties required some adaptation, but offered rewarding results that stood out from standard wheat products. The heritage food movement embraced spelt as part of reclaiming traditional European foodways. Historians and food anthropologists documented spelt's central role in medieval cuisine, creating renewed interest in this nearly forgotten grain. Historical reenactment groups and living history museums began growing and using spelt, bringing its story to wider audiences. Spelt cultivation has now spread beyond its traditional European strongholds. North American farmers have embraced the grain, particularly in organic agriculture systems. Its natural resilience and lower input requirements make it well suited for sustainable farming approaches. Once again, fields of spelt wave in the wind, though now often harvested with combines rather than scythes. What other ancient foods might be waiting for rediscovery in our modern world? Could the dietary wisdom of medieval monks have something to teach our Instagram-influenced eating habits? When we bite into spelt bread today, are we tasting the past or the future of food?